Hi, I'm Phillip, the personality behind the Everyday Expat Cebu channel. Before I begin today, allow me to offer a simple reminder. If you're an expat, retired and living here in the Philippines, you are privileged to be a guest in this beautiful archipelago. The people around you are not simply part of the scenery of your expat adventure. They are living their lives, raising their families, working, dreaming, struggling, and celebrating just as you once did when you were younger. So represent us well. Smile, be kind, be patient, show respect. You may feel that you are living on a tight budget, but remember that even a modest retirement income can place you well above the income of many hardworking, higher income Filipinos. If you receive $1,500 or more each month, your income is substantial by Philippine standards. Learning how to live well in the Philippines takes time. And remember, expats don't all fit into one category. We come from different countries, backgrounds, experiences, and circumstances. Don't fall into the groupthink and stereotypes that can become so prominent in expat circles and on YouTube. Be your own person. Get out of that expat bubble. Form genuine relationships with Filipinos. Listen to their stories. Learn from them. And allow the Philippines to change your understanding of what it means to live a good life. After all, we're not simply here to live in the Philippines. We are here to learn how to live with the Philippines. So, welcome to an expat channel designed to educate and inspire you on the many subjects that can help prepare you for your own expat journey. In this episode, I'm going to share some personal experiences involving the challenges, surprises, and joys of public transportation in the Philippines. In particular, I'll talk about buses, jeepneys, taxis, vans, ferries, banca boats, and even a few of the vehicles I've owned along the way. Most of us probably don't fit particularly well in a tricycle. I know I don't. And I'm only 5'8", and I'm not tremendously heavy. And those tricycles are tough to get in and out of. So we're a little too old too to be climbing onto a hubble-hubble. A hubble-hubble, for those that don't know, is a guy with a motorcycle who carries an extra helmet and whoever needs a ride. And those guys are usually just flagging and waving at people all day trying to make a few pesos riding their motorcycle. But transportation is an unavoidable and often entertaining part of life in the Philippines. And after many years of traveling around these islands, I have accumulated a few stories, more than a few, but I'll just share a few with you. In these stories, you can begin to understand the realities of public transportation. It's not the same anymore. It's much nicer. It's still different. But I'm going to tell a few older stories. So my Victory Liner is a bus company. It's a popular bus company in Luzon. So I'll begin with my first Victory Liner ride from Subic to Manila back in the 70s. I always enjoyed going to the bus depot because it meant I was about to begin a new journey. Even today, I like that feeling. For the first leg of the ride from Subic to Manila was a long stretch of dirt road passing between rice fields. The road had plenty of holes created by rain, and there were puddles, and the ride could get a little bouncy. Sometimes the windows would be stuck and nobody could get them up. If it started raining, you couldn't always close them. You just got wet. If it was dry, you could get a nice face full of dust. But there was one part of those trips that I really enjoyed and I remember particularly fondly. My favorite part was when the driver would stop to pick up a boy, probably around 12 years old, maybe a little older. He had a club foot. But what he really had was an extraordinary voice. That kid could sing. He would stand in the aisle and sing opera, a cappella, with confidence, bravado, style. He wasn't shy about it at all. He would slowly make his way from the front of the bus toward the back, carrying a bag for donations. The kid knew he was good. He would ride with us for 15 minutes or more, then get off, wait for another bus going in the opposite direction, and do it all over again. He had figured out a way to make a living by using the talent he had. I have to admit it saddened me when the air-conditioned buses, paved roads, and modern rest stops eventually replaced that old way of traveling. Those new buses are certainly more comfortable. They no longer stop for the vendors, performers, and young entrepreneurs who were part of the journey. Sometimes progress gives us something better while quietly taking something away. Well, you need to learn about pickpockets. I haven't had that problem for a long time. I've been driving my own vehicles and I seldom use any kind of public transportation. But I did learn some lessons for those of you that do, and sometimes just by watching. Over time, I noticed that if a few young men began creating a commotion over something as simple as dropping a few coins of change, it could be a distraction for another person or for they themselves to do some very active pickpocket work. If you witness something like that, my advice is simple. Don't make yourself part of the confrontation. Let the moment pass. I also learned to protect myself by taking a window seat whenever possible. That wasn't a perfect solution, but it made it a little harder for someone to get across to me. Now, this is a fun story. I was a taxi ride during martial law. Another transportation memory comes from the period of martial law. I had arrived at the international airport and was issued a travel pass for Subic that allowed me to take a taxi. The road from Manila toward the turnoff for Subic wasn't too bad, but a significant part of the trip through Pampanga was still dirt road. It seemed that my taxi driver knew every pothole in the road because he was driving really fast, and that little car, he just managed to just dodge all those potholes, more or less. Then suddenly a member of the Philippine constabulary jumped out from behind the sugarcane. This is in the middle of the night, you know. He pumped a shotgun, pointed it at us, and stood in the middle of the road. We stopped. The constabulary officer wasn't familiar with my international travel pass, and he and the taxi driver had a long discussion about whether I was permitted to travel after midnight. Eventually, he accepted the paperwork and let us continue. We finally arrived in Subic. Then came the next surprise. The taxi driver had apparently decided that the negotiated price we had agreed upon before leaving Manila was no longer sufficient. Suddenly, my negotiated fare had a new zero on the end. I was too young and too poor to tolerate someone taking advantage of me. I put the amount we had originally agreed upon in his hand, turned around, and walked away. It's a solution I've used a number of times with problems like that. So, in the 1980s, I regularly rode buses like the ones you would see at the Cubao and Pasay bus stations in Manila. I was traveling from Tacloban towards southern Leyte. On one trip, we came to a mountain pass where one lane of the road had collapsed. The buses were waiting for one another to get through. The problem was that the buses weren't making stops and everyone along the way, and so everyone had been sitting there for quite a while. We were all developing the same problem. We needed to use a restroom. My friend James Ballista and I were sitting near the rear of the bus. We were so young, so naturally we came up with a solution. We climbed out the bus window. We found a banana tree to provide a little privacy, took care of business, and then had to figure out how to get back inside. I boosted James up to the window. Once he was inside, he reached his arm down so I could use it to pull myself back up. We were young. It was all good times, and years later, good stuff to laugh about. Another time, this was in 2012, I was riding in a ticketed van from Tacloban to Ormoc. When the engine died, it was a stick shift van, and the driver decided to try the old pop the clutch method. First, we had to push the van up the hill. So me and a few guys got out of the van, pushed it up the hill, and hit the downhill stretch where the driver got it started. So we were back on the road. That's one of the joys of traveling in the Philippines. It's never boring. I've also ridden in the back of a jeepney and given up my seat and held onto the chrome rails and stood on the bumper and endured the rain for a couple of hours. I was young then. I could do things like that. From 2006 to 2010, I took groups of college students on educational trips around the Philippines. We would often begin in Luzon, travel to Leyte, and finish the trip in Cebu. On one trip, our first night was in Leyte. I had an older couple with me, around 25. They were traveling to the Philippines for the first time and decided they wanted to go from Palo, where we were staying, into Tacloban City and look around. And they were going to take a jeepney. I warned them very clearly. I told them, if guys drag something over your legs wanting to get out, if they got in, and then within a little while they're wanting to get out and they're dragging stuff over your legs and bumping you, they're getting their hands in your purse and they're going to take your wallet. And I told the female this, and I told her to hug that wallet, hug that purse, keep it closed, keep it zipped. I told the husband to watch out for her. They needed to pay attention because it didn't work out for them. I explained that while their attention was being drawn, you're going to lose that purse. You're going to lose the wallet anyway. Honestly, folks, those kids didn't get 50 yards from where the jeepney picked them up before the exact scenario I had described happened. The wife lost her wallet, cash, and bank card. It was not a happy moment. It was an expensive lesson, and one I hope they wouldn't have had to learn quite so quickly. I'll go into a few taxi stories. If you're an expat in the Philippines, eventually you're going to acquire your own collection of taxi stories. Some will be frustrating, some will be funny, and some will remind you why you came here in the first place. One of my favorite taxi experiences happened in Manila. I met a young father who was toward the end of his shift, and he was obviously tired. As you know, taxi drivers work extraordinarily long hours, and you can tell when they're nearing the end of the day. I liked this particular driver, so I invited him to dinner with me. We had a good conversation. I paid for dinner, and I paid him for his time and for a ride back to the Mabuhay Manor where I was staying. It lifted his spirits, and honestly, it lifted mine too. Not every transportation story has to be a confrontation. Sometimes a little kindness goes a long way. Well, there is the problem of the taxi with a broken meter. This is like a common thing. On the other hand, I've had plenty of taxi drivers refuse to turn on their meters. The usual explanation is the meter doesn't work. I learned to ask before getting into a taxi whether the meter worked. But one evening, traveling from the airport to the now closed Mabuhay Manor, the driver told me his meter worked, so I got in. Once we started driving, he refused to turn it on. He said we could negotiate the price when we arrived. I told him if he didn't turn on the meter, I was not going to pay him. He never turned it on. When we arrived, I got my bag, got out of the taxi, and walked into the hotel. The driver immediately went to the security guard and complained that I hadn't paid him. I explained to the security guard exactly what had happened. The driver had refused to use the meter, and I had told him beforehand that I wouldn't pay if he didn't turn it on. The security guard laughed and waved me onward into the hotel. Sometimes you just have to know when to stand your ground. I have another taxi story that goes all the way back to when I was only 20 years old. I had arrived at the international airport and was approached by a man who insisted that he needed to make money for his family. He told me he had a good car down in the airport parking lot. Well, some of you guys are already going, well, that was stupid if you went there. No. Yeah, it was stupid. I was young. I was learning. I was, sometimes kindness just got me in trouble back in the day. So my kindness hasn't changed, but it's certainly been educated in the school of experience. I followed him down to the car. Then a couple of younger guys appeared carrying towels. They began flipping the towels at me, apparently testing how I would react. Well, they found out. I responded rather aggressively and told them I was more than willing to beat them with their own towels. I turned around, walked back up the hill, and got an airport taxi. Another lesson learned. Yeah, always get your taxi at the lines outside the airport. Don't go looking, or don't fall for anybody's. I can give you a ride, better ride. I'll take you around all day. I mean, you might meet a nice guy and you might not. So more recently, I had another failed taxi experience. My wife and I were returning from Macau just this past February. We had chose to not leave our vehicle at the airport. We left it at home. And so when we arrived back to Cebu, we got a Grab, or we tried to get a Grab. My wife was looking for a driver. It's only about an hour and a half ride to our house. The guy showed up, but he was a taxi driver. So she's calling Grab. She should get a private car. Instead, it's a taxi driver with a taxi. I wasn't particularly happy about that. When you use Grab, that's not what you expect. So we were tired. My wife was having difficulty finding a Grab driver, so we decided to give him a chance. His taxi was run down and clearly it wasn't well maintained. As we began the trip, I noticed that he was taking crowded back roads. I knew the main road was both shorter and faster. I told him so. He didn't have much to say. So we had him drop us off at Park Mall. I didn't pay him the amount of money that he had asked for. He didn't deserve it. And he was just, I don't know what he was up to. We got another Grab driver with a nice, clean SUV and a better price. Within a few days, we were hearing stories from others about taxi drivers taking crowded back roads in an attempt to stretch out their time and distance. So much for my soft heart. Sometimes a soft heart can be a good thing, and sometimes, well, oh well. So, this is a funny story because on one of my educational trips, I instead of taking young kids, I managed a group of adults. One of the guys was 70 years old and I was 60 at the time. So I rented a nice 12-seat passenger van at the International Airport in Manila and started driving through Manila toward the expressway. And I kept watching the older gentleman in my rearview mirror. He had a lot of facial expressions. Finally, he asked me, "How do you learn to drive here?" I said, "You don't. You just get in and drive." Honestly, the people sitting in the back on their first trip to the Philippines looked like cats that had just landed on the ground with their hair standing straight up. And Manila traffic can do that to you. You can also, there's a lot of old ships that you can take, not old anymore. Back in the day, there were old rust buckets. So I've used a lot of transportation. In 1984, I took my first ship ride with my friend James, traveling from Ormoc to Cebu. And we chose the open deck cots rather than the private or group rooms. We were crossing in the evening and it was cold. James and I lay on our cots on the deck, talked, and watched the night pass around us. Today, the ships are considerably more comfortable and nicer. My first ride on a Sea-Cat fast ferry from Ormoc to Cebu, what a difference. Large, comfortable seats, air conditioning, big flat screen television, windows looking out over the beautiful ocean, and best of all, you could buy snacks. The Sea-Cat fast ferry was, for me, luxury. Now, banca boats. Banca boat is stabilized by bamboo outriggers on both sides. There are all types and sizes: wooden, fiberglass, small ones for local fishermen, larger ones with motors, with refrigeration for hauling fish to market, and others for passenger transport. These are readily available for transportation from one island to another at many piers on the islands. I personally enjoy riding banca boats. Some offer island hopping tours. They are an everyday need for many Filipinos who transport goods from island to island. Now, in the 80s, I was on Biliran. It's a little island off the coast of Leyte. I was staying at a small fisherman village. There's a row of simple wooden houses along the beach, nice clear water, all the kids swimming there. And one evening, one of the fishermen invited me out on his local little banca boat to go fishing. We tossed our nets and caught a few fish. The Coleman lantern hanging from an upright post was attracting squid. All we had to do was drop a line with a hook into the water and one by one pull the squid up and into the boat. We had been out for quite a while when I realized something. I couldn't see a single light from the village or anywhere else. We paddled for what seemed like a couple of hours. I began imagining the sun coming up and the two of us still being somewhere out in the middle of the ocean. My Filipino friend Arthur remained completely calm. He kept telling me which side of the boat to paddle. Every now and then he would reach down into the water, feeling the current, even the temperature. Then suddenly I saw it, a light. Arthur had navigated us all the way back to shore using nothing but his knowledge of the water and his surroundings. We came ashore directly in front of his house. I was amazed. That night I learned something I would see many times during my years in the Philippines. There is knowledge that doesn't come from books or instruments. Sometimes it comes from simply knowing the water, the land, and the life around you. Okay, in my practice, 4 wheels are better, your own 4 wheels. I suggest that if you're planning to retire here, save a little money and purchase an automobile. The Philippines has a mandatory insurance for all automobile owners that is paid each year when you register your vehicle and get your smog check. The insurance is at current exchange rates $10. If you get a fender bender here, it's cheaper to get it fixed than your deductible in the US. Personally, I recommend buying a big SUV if you're going to spend a lot of time traveling around the Philippines. My first vehicle after returning to the Philippines in 2017 was a Toyota Fortuner. It was a diesel and it seemed like the fuel lasted forever. My wife and I had a lot of adventures with that vehicle. We named it Iron Man because it felt like a protective suit between us and the wild world outside. These days I own a Mitsubishi Montero Sport. That was my wife's choice. I've learned something important about marriage. If she's happy, I'm happy. The Montero seems to have a little more get up and go than the Fortuner, and it serves us well. You can travel easily anywhere in the Philippines because of public transportation. It's just readily available. There are folks who are fearful of driving and not accustomed to the congestion or the onslaught of motorcycle drivers. I find myself regularly sitting, waiting on a traffic light, surrounded on all sides by 25 or 30 motorcycles. This is just part of life here, and although I've witnessed too many motorcycle deaths, the driving of motorcycle riders has not changed. There's a well-known preacher here in Cebu, Joe Alfafara. On Sundays, he fills a room several times a day with over 1,500 people. Joe consistently reprimands the motorcyclists for their lack of consideration to the larger automobiles. He tells them, he says, "Don't you know I'm bigger than you?" His fatherly concern for the young folks who can only afford a motorcycle is also present. Now, in the 80s, I was here, my wife and 3 kids, and I before I got an old vehicle, I had a Suzuki 80 that was leaning up against a banana tree that my friend had, and it wouldn't run, and I got it fixed. So one day I decided I'd just take the family for a ride across the San Juanico Bridge, that at the time was the longest bridge in the Philippines before the CCLX was constructed here in Cebu. So don't ask me how we did it. You know, you just put one kid on the gas tank, another one in front of your wife, the other one in the back, and they have a nice ride across the San Juanico Bridge. It was a lot safer back then. It wasn't quite as crowded. We didn't even have to wear helmets. Now helmets are quite mandatory. I eventually got a jeepney-styled little passenger truck. It had facing row passenger seats in the back. Basically, the body was manufactured in someone's backyard. The body of the vehicle was homemade. It was fascinating watching Filipino men shape metal with hammers and chisels to build the body for that little vehicle. I didn't even have a conventional door handle. I had a simple sliding bolt like you'd have at your house door. It wasn't fancy, but it worked, and it was our little Jeep. So when I look back over my many years of traveling around the Philippines, transportation becomes more than simply a way of getting from one place to another. It becomes part of your story. I've ridden old buses over dirt roads, escaped through bus windows, pushed broken down vans up hills, ridden jeepneys, bargained with taxi drivers, crossed the island on old ships and modern ferries, driven through Manila traffic with terrified passengers, and carried my family across the San Juanico Bridge on a tiny motorcycle. I've seen transportation in the Philippines change dramatically. The roads are better, the buses are more comfortable, the ferries are faster. Grab has changed the way many people get around, and yet some things haven't changed. There are still surprises around the next corner. There are still lessons to learn. There are still stories waiting to happen. So if you're planning to become an expat in the Philippines, my advice is simple. Learn how transportation works. Learn to be observant. Learn when to negotiate and when to walk away. And most importantly, keep your sense of humor. Because after all these years, I can tell you one thing with certainty. Traveling in the Philippines is never boring. I'm Phillip. This is the Everyday Expat Cebu. Thanks for joining me. Leave a comment. I'll be happy to answer.